Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another build guide, and this time it's going to be a dual Shockwave Totem Hierophant, and this is going to be probably the last iteration of the Shockwave Totem builds. Um, I know I said I'd make 3, and I did. We're not going to do the Inquisitor since it's just super popular anyways, and yeah, there's kind of a lot to go over with this build, but I'll get right into the basics first, and then we can talk about some of the concepts I had in mind and why I wanted to try out Hierophant. So just going over the basics, we have increased crit damage, controlled destruction, conk effect, which obviously gets swapped out for increased AoE. Should probably do that now to get a better tooltip, better realistic view of the tooltip. Increased critical strikes. Shockwave Totem, this is level 21 in here, and then faster casting. Now, the reason why we use the crit is because we don't have a ton of crit in this build. Like, we're not going to get anywhere near the crit cap without crit strikes. So like on the assassin, that's why we don't use crit strikes. But in this case, we need it. And crit multi is just a really strong gem. You can replace this with added fire. It does a little bit more damage, but that damage is not it's not penning any resistances or anything like that. So a lot of it is getting mitigated, especially against certain bosses with high elemental resist. So ultimately, I usually just opt for crit multi to just get better straight fizz damage, as well as boosting our hatred damage on crits to help freeze. So that's why I put the crit multi gem in there. Now, the rest of the gear is actually pretty terrible. Even the chest itself is terrible. There's hardly any ES on it. This build has still a decent amount of ES despite the terrible gear because of the Ascendancy, essentially, which I'll get into in a second. But as you can see, only 150 ES, decent tri-res and some mana. No ES here, no ES here, just mostly resistances and health. Resistances, health, and cast speed. Resistances and mana. Resistances and health. And the wands are actually pretty strong. The wands are probably the strongest portion of this build for sure. As you can see, they're pretty decent. Something you'll notice about this iteration of the build that is not really you will see, and you won't see in other builds, that we're skimping on a lot of the mana regen and the mana. This ring has mana, but we're not really too worried about it on the neck or the other ring. And that's because this build doesn't need a lot of mana or mana regen because of the fact that we have the Hierophant Ascendancy, and our casting of our skills is going to be free when we're on full ES, and it's only 50% of the normal cost, even when we're chunked out of ES. So right now, Shockwave Totem's free, as you can see, and when I take a little damage here to my ES, it's about 80 or 90 mana to cast, which is way better than the 180 mana, which is what the totem would cost if you didn't have any sort of reduced cost of skills or anything like that. So it makes the build a lot cheaper, a lot more manageable. Just another advantage to Hierophant, which we'll be getting into. Getting mana on stuff is still nice, obviously, because the mana essentially translates into some form of ES, especially because it's being multiplied by the nodes you get from the tree and the like. So that's certainly never bad, but yeah, that's the basic concept there. Now, let's get into the Ascendancy, and then I'll begin to talk about some of those nuances. So we're basically looking to get Sanctuary of Thought, which is the node that reduces the cost of the skills by 50%, and it gives us 25% of our maximum mana as extra energy shield, which is insane because, like I said, we have virtually no ES in this setup. Almost every slot could be improved drastically in ES, and we don't have any Discipline Aura running, and we still have around 1900 ES, so that's pretty crazy. So this node does a lot of work for you. This node is also great. Just the 150 mana is amazing. And then the mini Mind Over Matter, which is always nice. You can just use it in itself or combine it with the 30% node over here. And then the Power Charges node. Now, the Power Charge node is great because, in my opinion, it lets you play the build like a totem build should be played, and play it a lot more defensively and safely, because you don't have to be worrying about keeping up your charges in difficult maps or anything like that. You can pretty much just play defensive, play behind your totems, and you'll be golden, just essentially spamming totems and killing things and running from one pack to the next. You even get a decent amount of power charge duration and endurance charge duration. Now, the endurance charges aren't super consistent, but they're still relatively consistent enough where you notice the impact. And in terms of the charges in general, they're good for most things. I would say that you may want to run an Orb of Storms just for bosses in some case to refresh the actual stack of charges you have in case there's no ads around. But it's nice not being able or not having to spam Orb of Storms on a boss or something like that in order to generate your charges. So that's really nice. The only exception here might be something like Core Malachi, where you kind of have to go back in the zone. So you may have to like leave mobs up if you really want to go into the zone with full charges. So there'll be some caveats like that always, but overall it's a pretty solid node in keeping your charges up. Now, if you were to get Uber with this build, I think Pursuit of Fate is the best option you could go. But it doesn't really do a lot, and I haven't bothered to get it on this character. Character's only level 87, and I was kind of just like trying to get something up to make a guide and see how it would play, because I was thinking of possibly doing this next league. The 8% cast speed is certainly good, but the 4% increased damage is only really going to help if you absolutely slaughter a huge pack or something like that, which Shockwave Totem is capable of, but I would say it's just not like the best Uber nodes for sure. So that's about the Ascendancy. Now, in terms of how I was originally going to do this build, so my initial thought was just have a huge ton of mana unreserved for Mind Over Matter, and then a decent amount of health and a ton of ES, so we kind of go like hybrid, and we'd have a lot of effective health. Now, the problem with that is if you look at Mind Over Matter, you see that Mind Over Matter only activates when damage is taken from life before mana. So if you're taking damage to ES, it actually doesn't affect Mind Over Matter at all, which was a pretty big oversight in the initial build, because originally what I was going to do is I was going to slap on an Essence Worm, like so, and we're going to put our Hatred in the Essence Worm, and reserve our Hatred, which gives us a nice damage boost and the Hatred effect for the cold. As you can see, we're easily over 50k there, allowing us to get that defensive ability and make use of our crit multi-gem here a little bit more. And we'd be super defensive, right? But that's not how it actually turns out, and you have to get hit with a huge hit to even get into your mana, because you have to deplete all your ES, and then it's only going to take 30% of whatever damage goes to the health, and we only have 4.6k health, and we have like around 2k mana, so obviously the math isn't really working out here. Even on a huge hit that would bring your health down to like 1k or something, you're still not really taking that much from your mana. You still have a ton left unreserved, so it's a bit problematic for sure. And the other thing I was doing is, since we're not reserving any mana, I was using the, what is this jewel called? The Clear Mind Jewel, in order to give us extra spell damage and mana regen, which is great on paper, but I just can't justify at the end of the day, I think, sacrificing this much unreserved mana when it could be put towards some other better use just to get a little bit of a spell damage boost. So ultimately I did end up changing the build around a little bit. And there's a couple ways you can do it, right? So you can either keep the Hatred in, and then you can just turn on Discipline. And if you do that, you have around a K mana, and you gain a lot more ES. And you would replace this gem, obviously, because it's no longer working since we're reserving our mana. So you'd replace it probably with like a health and damage jewel or something like that. But we have just a ton more ES, and now that we have half the mana, like a lot more of this is going to be used if a big hit comes in onto your health. It's going to be a lot closer to being fully utilized, I would say. Now you can do this another way. If you just put your normal ring back in, and then you put your Hatred in your gloves, and then you can run your Hatred as well as your Discipline, but then you don't really have too much mana left over. So the interesting thing about this is that you may not want to take Mind Over Matter if you actually decide to go this route. Just having this will pretty much be enough in itself. It'll give you like a little bit of damage reduction, but you don't want to be getting hit a ton and just not being able to cast. Even though the totems are free with no ES, you're going to pretty much assume your ES is going to be depleted, and they're still going to be costing around 80 mana or so when you're at like any value that's not full ES. So yeah, you're still gonna run into some issues if you have like 40% of your damage going to life going to mana and you only have like 300 mana. It's just a little bit sketch to me. I'd want like a little bit more mana for sure just to be safe to run that. So if you're going this version of the build, I would just suggest sticking with Divine Guidance and removing a point from here. But like I said, you can also just do this combination right here at the Essence Worm, and it works out pretty great. So yeah, there's that. And let's see here. You just go over the general tree. Mostly just area, spell damage, cast speed when you can. I have to get some elemental damage at the start just because that's the only way to path out. Some life regen, mana, more crit. Just stacking a bunch of crit with this build. Pretty standard stuff for the totem build that you would see like in the layout of this area and stuff like that. Picking up the main power charges. I'd also get this power charge. Right now I only have 5. I have the one from the bandits. Yeah, so nothing really too crazy here. In terms of the damage, when you have your full charges, you go to around, if you're using the other version where you're using the spell damage thing, your damage does creep up pretty high, I think into like the 70 some or 80k range or whatever, so it's definitely a damage fall off when compared to the other builds that you've seen me do with Shockwave Totem, but it still does relatively decent damage, and it's pretty fucking tanky if it's in a form like this, because you have essentially like 7k effective health and then you have the 1k mana, and this regens pretty fast, so pretty tanky for a life-based totem build that's essentially hybrid. For the golem, you're going to want to use lightning golem for the cast speed pretty much, and yeah, that's pretty much it. When you throw in Conk Effect, you can easily get the damage up to like around 100k or something. I can just throw Conk Effect back in now. As you can see, the damage rises quite substantially. When you throw your crit down, you're at 75k. And then you're going to have like 5 power charges or 6 power charges on top of this, which you'll see in the video that I'll link to demo the build. So it's just another version of Shockwave at the end of the day. Just a more tanky, less damage version. And what I'm really interested in is I'm going to be applying this to the other Freezing Pulse build that you've seen in the channel. So I'm going to respec this a little bit, maybe level it up. And I think that's where we can get a really fun idea going here, where we can get a really good benefit out of the Mind Over Matter while still getting a ton of ES and making that build even more defensive and more safe with the freeze and a high hybrid health and ES pool. So be looking forward to that. But that's pretty much it for this build. And thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, just please feel free to leave them down below, and I'll get back to them as soon as I can. So see you next time.